On the plains of Zama, as two mighty armies faced each other, an unforgettable clash in history began. Rome's disciplined legions were about to engage in a fierce confrontation with Carthage's legendary war elephants. The massive size of the elephants shook the ground, creating some of the most terrifying sights of the battle. As Rome's cavalry faltered due to the clever maneuvers of the Numidians, sudden shifts in the winds would determine the fate of the war. For a moment, Hannibal's plans seemed to promise victory, but the legions of Rome, under the strategic genius of Scipio, made a final move that would alter the course of the battle, turning the tide in Rome's favor. Amid bloody clashes and dramatic moments, it became clear just how high the price of victory would be. Every moment of this epic battle, where vengeance, strategy, and courage intertwined, unveils a striking journey across the grounds of the plains of Zama. Rome and Carthage had been locked in a fierce struggle for control of the Mediterranean for years. Amid this rivalry, Carthage's greatest military genius, Hannibal Barca, rose to prominence. Inheriting his father's hatred for Rome, Hannibal swore an oath against Rome at a young age. This vow became the foundation of an unyielding determination that transformed him into a legend on the battlefield. Yet, Rome's power lay not only in its armies, but in its resilience and strategic brilliance. The Second Punic War began with a decision that tested Hannibal's courage and genius. He planned to cross the Alps with his army and elephants, launching an assault on the heart of Rome. This passage seemed like an impossible challenge. The cold and ruthless face of the mountains was consuming both men and animals. As Carthaginian soldiers froze to death, most of the elephants could not withstand the harsh winter conditions. Still, Hannibal, with his leadership, convinced his army of victory. When they reached the summit of the Alps, they left behind a trail of blood, sweat, and shattered hopes. After crossing the Alps, Hannibal began to strike swiftly at Roman territory. He crushed Roman armies one after another in battles such as Trebia, Trasimene, and Cannae. Cannae, in particular, was a disaster for Rome. Thousands of soldiers perished on the battlefield, and Rome's image of invincibility was shattered. Yet, these victories came at a heavy price for Hannibal. Carthage could not provide enough resources to support his army. Hannibal seemed stranded in enemy territory, isolated and alone. Rome, however, devised a new strategy to defeat Hannibal in their own way. The young commander Scipio Africanus cut off Hannibal's supply routes by destroying Carthage's presence in Spain. Scipio proved himself with victories in Spain and formed an alliance with the Numidian cavalry leader Massinissa, gaining a significant advantage. This move by Scipio would prove to be a turning point in the war, altering its course completely. Hannibal was no longer on the offensive, but had become the defender. Years later, when Hannibal returned to his homeland of Carthage, he was hailed as a hero. Yet, Scipio had already turned his attention directly to Carthage, aiming to complete the final chapter of the war. Both sides were preparing for the ultimate battle. Hannibal took command of the Carthaginian forces, and on the plains of Zama, he faced Scipio. This battle was not just a confrontation between two armies. It was a monumental clash that would shape the future of two civilizations. The Mediterranean was about to witness one of history's bloodiest conflicts. When Hannibal returned to Carthage after years of warfare, his once mighty army had been worn out and depleted. The Roman threat was now at the gates. Recognizing the inevitability of the battle on the plains of Zama, Hannibal moved quickly to gather all remaining strength of Carthage. New recruits were assembled, war elephants were brought back into the fray, and plans were laid for one final confrontation with Rome. Yet Hannibal knew that time and resources were against him. Every move he made now would determine Carthage's fate. Scipio Africanus, determined to restore Rome's invincibility, allied with his Numidian counterpart, Massinissa. the Numidian cavalry, known for their speed and agility, could prove to be a decisive force on the battlefield. Scipio carefully studied Hannibal's past victories and analyzed his tactics. He sought weaknesses in the genius who had crossed the Alps, while the Roman army was better trained than ever for this final battle. Every soldier was aware that they would face a commander like Hannibal on the battlefield. The plains of Zama were chosen as the site of the ultimate confrontation. This vast open space provided Hannibal with a significant advantage, especially in utilizing the power of his war elephants. However, Scipio sought to counter this advantage with the rigid discipline and organized structure of Rome's military. Hannibal meticulously studied the battlefield, calculated Rome's potential maneuvers, and made plans to turn the elephants into a deadly force of destruction. For Carthage, this battle was not only about preserving its lands, but also its honor. Before the battle, both commanders gave their final speeches to motivate their troops. Hannibal reminded his soldiers that they would avenge the years of Roman oppression. The Carthaginians, well aware of the looming Roman threat since their childhood, were ready to fight. Scipio, on the other hand, told his men that the victory would secure Rome's future. There was a silent resolve and tension on both sides. The plains of Zama seemed less like a battlefield and more like a stage for history, where the fate of two civilizations would be decided. As Hannibal and Scipio prepared for this great battle with contrasting strategies and approaches, both sides understood the irreversible consequences of the struggle. Carthage's war elephants had become symbols of defiance against Scipio's plans. Rome, in turn, had to respond to Hannibal's brilliance with discipline. Even before the battle began, the plains of Zama waited as a silent witness to the bloody history that would unfold. At dawn, the plain of Zama became a tense standoff between two armies. In the front lines of Hannibal's forces, the imposing war elephants stood ready. Each of these giant creatures was a destructive machine, prepared to tear through enemy ranks. The Carthaginian soldiers, trusting in Hannibal's genius, waited in silent patience. Across from them, the disciplined and steadfast Roman legions formed their ranks. Scipio had arranged his soldiers in tight formations, with the Numidian cavalry positioned on the flanks, ready for action. Hannibal's elephants were the most striking element of the battlefield. These colossal animals symbolized the strength and fearlessness of the Carthaginian army. Each one was armored in thick armor, with deadly spears mounted on their tusks and backs. The ground shook with every step of their enormous feet, and their roars filled the air, instilling courage in the Carthaginian soldiers and terror in the Roman ones. With their size and might, these creatures seemed to command the battlefield with their will. However, as the elephants advanced, Scipio's Numidian cavalry sprang into action. The Numidians, equipped with speed and agility, knew the elephants' weaknesses. They began launching feints to confuse the creatures and redirect their charge. The Numidians attempted to drive the elephants into panic with swift maneuvers, loud cries, and spear strikes. Some of the beasts panicked in the chaos, while others charged uncontrollably across the battlefield. The elephants, with their immense size and power, now became a threat not only to the Romans, but to their own horses as well. Scipio's strategy was working. Carthage's greatest weapon had turned into an uncontrollable danger. The Roman line was ready to face Hannibal's first wave. Some of the elephants, enraged by the spears driven into their sides, went into a frenzy. The massive creatures began retreating, stampeding back towards their own ranks. The battlefield erupted in a cacophony of animal screams and the chaos of soldiers. Hannibal realized his initial plan had failed, but did not retreat. He immediately sent his infantry into the fray, marking the true beginning of the confrontation. As the Carthaginian soldiers advanced toward the Roman lines, Hannibal's presence on the battlefield emboldened his troops. Scipio, however, continued to guide his legions with careful precision. The two armies clashed in a deadly dance of swords and spears. On the battlefield, thick with dust, blood, and sweat, every step was a step closer to death. Neither Hannibal nor Scipio ever thought to fall back. For both sides, victory was a goal to be achieved at any cost. The plains of Zama began to reveal the true horror of war in its early clashes. The disciplined Roman legions had held firm against the Carthaginian assault. But Hannibal knew the battle was far from over. He had not yet deployed his reserve forces and still had one final move to make. Scipio, on the other hand, understood that victory would only come through patience and strategy, and he prepared to counter Hannibal's next move. The lines of Rome and Carthage were now completely intertwined. Spears and swords danced a deadly waltz through the air as soldiers from both sides risked their lives. The disciplined formations of the Roman legions were being systematically torn apart by Hannibal's relentless attacks. Carthage's light infantry, advancing toward the Roman center, met greater resistance with every step they took on the blood-soaked earth. The battlefield trembled with the reality of screams, the clash of metal against metal, and the cold truth of death. Hannibal unleashed his reserve troops, attempting to break the Roman defenses. These reinforcements charged fiercely toward the Roman lines at the most critical moment. However, Scipio had prepared for this move. The Numidian cavalry moved swiftly to flank and encircle the enemy, striking at the sides and rear of the Carthaginian forces. This maneuver threw the Carthaginian ranks into momentary chaos. The battle had transformed from a tactical engagement into a brutal struggle for survival. The dust clouds had thickened to the point where they concealed who was fighting where. Carthage's infantry, following Hannibal's orders, regrouped and continued their push to breach the Roman center. Yet, under Scipio's leadership, the Roman legions demonstrated extraordinary resilience. Their shields formed an impenetrable wall as they deflected enemy blows, pushing the Carthaginian soldiers back with counterattacks. The Carthaginian forces, weighed down by heavy armor and fighting under the scorching sun, fought on despite the looming presence of death, desperate to make one last charge. However, Rome's disciplined order slowly dismantled Hannibal's tactical advantage. The peak of the battle resembled a butcher's shop, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. The fallen and the wounded filled the battlefield, making movement difficult for the remaining soldiers. Blood mixed with the earth, and the sky had turned into a thick, smoke-like haze. At this point, neither Hannibal nor Scipio considered retreat. Both commanders understood that victory could only be achieved through death. Carthage's hope rested on breaking through the Roman lines, even if only for a brief moment. Rome's hope lay in maintaining discipline and pushing back this attack. As the sun began to set, the fiercest clashes of the battle were drawing to a close. The Carthaginian forces, weakened by exhaustion and heavy losses, were now close to breaking. Hannibal's strategic advantage was slowly yielding to the unwavering discipline of the Roman soldiers. These final moments of the battle would go down in history as a violent testament to the limits of human willpower. Zama Plain was about to leave behind a bloody silence from these clashes. For a brief moment, silence fell over the battlefield amidst the swirling dust. It was nothing more than the calm before the storm. Both the Roman and Carthaginian armies were gathering their last strength to annihilate each other. Hannibal directed his reserve forces toward the heart of the Roman lines. Carthaginian soldiers, wielding swords and spears, surged forward as if to challenge death itself. But Scipio, fully aware of this move, had prepared an unexpected counterattack. The Numidian cavalry, swiftly encircling the Carthaginian flanks, intensified the pressure. This moment of the battle would mark the decisive turning point that would alter the course of history. As the Numidian cavalry advanced behind the Carthaginian lines, panic spread among Hannibal's troops. The Carthaginian forces, already engaged in fierce combat with the Roman legions, now had to contend with a cavalry attack from the rear. The disciplined Roman legions seized this moment of chaos and launched a counteroffensive. The Carthaginian soldiers, overwhelmed by confusion, could no longer distinguish friend from foe. Hannibal's carefully crafted plan began to unravel in the face of Rome's strategic discipline. The Carthaginian center was gradually forced to retreat, while the Roman forces, gaining momentum, broke through the enemy's defenses. The battlefield was filled with screams, the dull sound of drums, and the clash of armor. Hannibal's troops, unwilling to retreat, were growing weaker in the face of Rome's unwavering resolve. Despite Hannibal's best efforts, Scipio managed to maintain control of the situation. For the Carthaginians, the battle had ceased to be a fight for victory and had turned into a struggle for survival, heading inevitably toward disaster. As the sun bathed the battlefield in an orange glow, Hannibal's army found itself completely surrounded. There was no place left to flee, and they were forced to confront the grim reality of defeat. Though the intensity of the battle seemed to ease, the struggle for survival continued in every corner of the field. Rome's strategic superiority had completely shattered the Carthaginian resistance. While the possibility of a loss loomed in Hannibal's mind, his hope of rallying his troops still remained. Yet, the outcome of the battle was now undeniable. The final whistle of battle blew across the plains of Zama. The Roman legions had firmly established their dominance. Carthage's last resistance had been shattered. Hannibal's leadership and courage came to an end in this bloody battlefield. The retreating soldiers were so exhausted they could scarcely recognize one another. The survivors fled the battlefield, carrying with them the weight of lost honor and fallen comrades. Only destruction and blood remained. Carthage's fate had ended with Rome's victory. The brutal and bloody reality of the war had deeply affected both sides. Carthage's losses were not only military, but also psychological and moral. Hannibal's intelligence and strategies were not enough to secure a great military victory, and the devastating consequences of the war shook all of Carthage. Rome, on the other hand, savored its victory, but would pay a long-term price for it. The disaster at Zama was a turning point that hastened the fall of Carthage. After the war, Hannibal continued to defend his land, but he was left alone in the face of fate and the might of Rome. At the war's end, Carthage had lost much of the territory it once ruled. Following the victory, Rome consolidated its power in the Mediterranean. However, this victory left behind a legacy that would reshape not only Carthage, but the entire Mediterranean world. Rome, having crossed a historic threshold, succeeded in securing its people and lands. The legacy of Zama would echo for years to come. This war was more than just a military conflict. It was a pivotal moment that shifted the balance of power between civilizations. Hannibal's courage, Rome's discipline, and loyalty to strategy earned an unforgettable place in history books. Zama, a war in which both sides suffered immense losses, secured its place in history. But Rome's victory laid the foundations for the rise of the Roman Empire in the years that followed, while Carthage was erased from the land it once ruled. After Zama, Carthage found itself facing Rome's relentless pressure. Hannibal had tried to open the doors to victory, but Rome's power struck the final blow to Carthage's existence. The post-war treaties condemned Carthage to heavy reparations and loss of land. Carthage's military strength was destroyed, its navy obliterated, and its people burdened with enormous debt. Rome did not just defeat Carthage militarily, it economically enslaved the city. Carthage, unable to withstand these prolonged pressures, was eventually completely conquered by Rome. The remains of Carthage became a faded memory of the power and glory it once held. At the war's end, the dreams lost on those bloody fields left deep marks on the souls of the survivors. The plains of Zama had hosted one of the most brutal and unforgettable battles in history. Yet, the legacy of this battle would guide humanity, shaping both its past and its future. In this war, where destruction and victory intertwined, both the Carthaginians and Romans encountered a defining moment. With fallen empires and rising new civilizations, the plains of Zama remained a lasting mark on the land of history. The Battle of Zama was a historic turning point. This battle, which would determine the fate of the Roman Empire, brought two great armies face to face. Carthage's legendary commander Hannibal had shaken Rome for years with his victories. However, the clever strategies of Scipio Africanus and the resilience of the Roman army changed everything. This was not just a military clash. It symbolized the resilience and struggle for survival of a civilization. Zama was the pinnacle of war and strategy. Hannibal's elephants became a symbol of the battle. Initially, Rome had underestimated these massive creatures, but as the battle progressed, Carthage's great beasts went from being part of the army to creating chaos and confusion. Despite these threats, Scipio managed to turn the tide in Rome's favor by using the disciplined military force to secure victory. Each move brought Rome a step closer to ending the long struggle. The turning point of the battle came with the resistance of the Roman legions. Hannibal's plans momentarily seemed successful, but Rome's strong strategies and patient army reversed the course of the fight. Scipio's bold move opened the gates to victory, crushing Carthage's dreams. The Battle of Zama was not just a military victory, but also a testament to Rome's strategy, courage, and discipline. Afterward came the destruction of Carthage. Following Zama, the defeat of Carthage's army was not just a military loss, but also marked the collapse of a civilization. Years of victories and efforts to revive a great empire were wiped away in an instant. However, the legacy of Zama, with Rome's victory and Carthage's fall, secured its place in history. This battle symbolized not only the struggle of soldiers, but also the fight of peoples and civilizations. Finally, we thank you for watching this documentary. Together, we've explored the historical significance of the Battle of Zama and how it was shaped by heroism and strategy. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like, share, and comment. On our channel, you will find many more historical war documentaries and videos exploring important moments in history. Keep watching, and don't forget to check out our other videos.